2, 1. This is Chargers Unleashed podcast. Here are your hosts, Dan Wolkenstein and Jake Hefner.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. Today's show, of course, is being brought to you by BetOnline, Charger Bolt Family, and Rock Solid Sports Memorabilia. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, there's no practice today for the Chargers, but that does not stop us from doing a show.
There is football on TV.
There's finally football on TV. Again, preseason or not, there's football on television. So to you people who still don't like preseason football, I have yet to understand you. We're just getting that much closer to regular season, in my opinion. I'm excited for it. But as I mentioned just a second ago, there's no practice for the Chargers today, as they did have an off day, but that does not stop us from doing a show, as we do have a very special guest for today's show, Dan.
Yes, Nick Cothrell from Sports Illustrated. He's been out at training camp for all of the training camps, so he has a very special view on what we have seen so far from camp. We've talked to him a few times while we've been out there. Lots of nuggets that he's hoping to give to us about camp battles, about some positive scenarios we're seeing from some players, some possible storylines to look forward to as we get going to training camp the rest of the way. So without further ado, Jake, Nick Cothrell, Sports Illustrated. But before we do that, of course, got to pay the bills. So in between, let's talk about BetOnline.
I thought you were going to give me an over-under.
Over-under, how many times we're going to talk about the Padres and the haul that they got at the trade deadline at 0.5.
What, with asking Nick?
Yeah.
Over-under 1. Call it like that. This is a football show still.
So are you taking the over-under?
I'm taking the under. Taking the under.
Because we're a Chargers podcast.
Yes. Still, I got to stay relative to the subject matter, my friend. Anyways, BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all of your favorite sports contests and events with first-to-market odds and lines. Find reviews and news for every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, UFC, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all of your sports information, from live in-game betting, props, and futures. Head on over to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to join and make your first sports bet using the promo code BELIEVE50. That's BLEAV50 to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Nick Cothrell, Sports Illustrated training camp overview coming up next. Welcome to Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner, Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. Today we have a special guest with us. Sports Illustrated's own Nick Cothrell has joined us to talk all things Chargers training camp from day one to day. Nick, thank you so much for joining us. Nick, how are you?
Good. Seven days of camp in the books, and it's been good to see you guys out there for a couple days. And just, you guys know, the overall vibe around the team is just buzzing, and every day is a new day. And it's just, you really can't beat training camp. It's really like one of the better parts of the year. It's been great so far.
Sweet. Jake, go ahead.
Nick, how many times, because we dealt with this the first day of camp, and then I think it was the day 4 of camp that you and I personally were dealing with it. How many days have you found an excuse to go over on the defensive side of the field just to stay out of the sun?
I try to do that every day, to be honest. It kind of depends what field they want to do the 7-on-7s or the 11-on-11s, but every day I try to make it on that far field. The shade that those trees provide it's at least 10 degrees cooler.
It's unbelievable.
I think it's a combination of the shade and not facing the sun. So I feel like on the other side, you're facing it, it's just beaming down
Put
on
the sun
you.
to your back. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, today I want to get into all kinds of storylines. Want to go into kind of the key takeaways so far from camp, maybe some individual standouts and some roster battles. So Nick, let's kind of jump right in here. You've been there since the jump. There's been a lot of buzz. We talked all about all kinds of players. Like for you, what are some of the key player performances or standouts that you've seen so far at camp?
Yeah, so let's start with the offense. On offense, obviously Zion being the first round pick, everybody wants to know what he's going to look like. And he's kind of following the footsteps of Rashawn Slater, which is no easy task at all, right? Like what he was able to do in year one it's really an outlier situation. Like you can't exactly put that on Zion. Now there's only been 2 days of pads, so that's what a real small sample size that we're dealing with, and what you could kind of go off of engage. But they were they were originally doing the one-on-ones on the far field like you guys were talking about. So I was over there, and they were only going about half speed. And then when they kind of kicked things into gear, they moved over onto the other field. So I was watching that from a distance. I wasn't up close, but from what I could see, Zion held his own. And then speaking with Corey Linsley and Matt Feiler, the day after we spoke with Linsley, and then the next day with Feiler, both of them were just praising what he can do. And I've only been on the beat since March, but Corey Linsley doesn't strike me as a guy that's just going to throw something out there. And what he was just praising his intelligence, just his pure strength. And to see that day one in pads, day two in pads was pretty remarkable. I was talking to Popper a little bit because he was over on that far side, and he said he saw Zion lose 1 rep. It was the first one to Austin Johnson, and then after that, really nobody pushed him around afterwards.
Wow. Let me flip it over to the defensive side of the ball real quick, and then we'll get back to the offensive things, because I was just thinking about some of the aspects, Nick, that you and I have both witnessed. And obviously, we don't know when Kenneth Murray's coming back. We know that there's a ramp-up period right now that Staley has talked about, but there's no given set timeline where they hope it is. Hopefully it's in the next 3 weeks. Drew Tranquill's dealing with his groin issue. Doesn't seem to be serious, but the one person that has really reaped the benefits of them both not being out on the field is one Damon Lloyd. How is that whole, second string, third string battle for linebacker basically been carried out here now? The fact that you have your 2 incumbent starters that are missing time, but a lot of these guys are getting extra reps right now. What is it you're seeing from that position group specifically?
Yeah, the linebacker group is probably the least flashiest group on the team, right? Like everybody's like, they have Drew Tranquill, and they brought in Kyle Van Noy, who's really, I haven't even seen him line up at edge once. He's like just playing inside linebacker at this point, which kind of makes sense with Kenneth Murray not available. But yesterday, Kyle Van Noy, he didn't partake in any of the 11-on-11 stuff. Ben Staley said it was just kind of like a load management day for a bunch of the vets. So it was mainly Troy Reeder, it was Nick Neiman. They were all kind of slotting in there, and both of them looked pretty good. Like, I don't think this is going to be a group that is wowing a bunch of fans, but at the same time, if they can just be fundamentally sound and good enough, especially with the defensive line, right? The run defense should be astronomically better. I mean, Khalil Mack, everybody looks at his sack numbers, but he's an elite run defender. And then we all know the big bodies that they brought in the middle. So, Damon Lloyd has really flashed. Like he's another one of those bodysuit, just looks like a physical freak. He's just, super chiseled. I think we were actually talking about that at practice, and it's like what he's been able to do. Nobody was really throwing his name around heading into camp, and he's just flashed. I reported or tweeted out a couple of days ago, in back-to-back plays, he had a sack and a tackle for loss, and his teammates were really behind him and cheering him on from the sideline, and he's just been a guy that he's definitely caught my attention. So,
how about, you look at kind of the edge position, right? You have Khalil Mack, you've got Joey Bosa, and I think Chris Rumpf, has improved a bit. Like, how do you see that standout area look? Like, what's that landscape look like other than the 3? Like, who stood out to you at edge that you think might be able to kind of bring a face to that group as a depth piece?
Yeah, edge is tough because, like, obviously we know who the first 2 guys are going to be with Khalil and Joey, and then Rumpf slots in there, and Rumpf has really looked good. I wasn't around the team last year, but people say, like, he looks noticeably bigger, and he spoke about that last month about, putting on some muscle, and 2 days ago, he had 2 plays. It was against the second team offense, and he, they're not fully tackling or obviously sacking quarterbacks, but it would have been 2 back-to-back sacks. And to get that from, your third rusher, fourth rusher, if you, pencil in Van Noy coming off the edge, that's pretty good to have. That's a good issue to have, right? Not being able to get someone like that onto the field. But really, I think Rumph is a guy that has kind of stood out aside from the proven commodities. He's a guy that has caught my eye as someone who is, just flying around, making plays, always around the ball. So yeah, edge is really not going to be in a position that they should worry about. But when you're having your guy who's like fourth in the pecking order flashing like that, it just kind of speaks volume to where they're at there.
Nick, let's talk about the running back situation for a second. I mean, everybody always or for now at least, expects that Isaiah Spiller is going to be the number 2 to Austin Eckler. I don't think that's in question whatsoever. We've heard a little bit of Joshua Kelly's name kind of being thrown out there a little bit as far as the guys in the rest of the stable, him kind of getting the most notoriety. And I know that you had a similar situation to this when you were covering the Rams last year. I mean, there was a lot of question marks about the Rams backfield and what was going to happen. But for the rest of those guys beyond Spiller, who's been like the one that you've seen? I know that Letty Brown had a nice touchdown run a couple days ago, but who's really shown flashes as far as who's going to be the guy who could take up that RB3 mantle?
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's going to continue to just evolve probably throughout the entirety of training camp. Like, and even for RB2, I would give Spiller the edge, but at the same time, he's going to still have to earn it. Like the coaching staff is not going to just hand it to him. And really, I think it is Josh Kelly. I think it's been Spiller and Kelly that have kind of led the way. And Roundtree's had some nice runs and catches out of the backfield to his own credit. But Kelly he's gained some muscle and put on some weight. He's a little bit more heavy. Kind of, Austin Eckler is that guy who can really do it all. But last year the Chargers kind of needed a thumper, and Spiller, he's a big body back. Kelly bulking up a little bit. And both of those guys, between Spiller and Kelly, they've both looked pretty darn good. Like they're bringing the juice, and that really from a pass catching perspective, both of them have looked nice, like getting the ball in their hands and really being able to do some work after the catch, navigating through traffic. And like I said, they've only had 2 days of pads, so that they're not like full on tackling each other, to the full extent. But both of those guys, between Spiller and Kelly, I think those guys are kind of like 2 and 3 right now. That'd be my assessment. But there's still so much time left, and things can change.
Looking at kind of the offense, and we started there, then we went over to the defense. We know the proven commodities, like you mentioned. We know the Rashawn Slaters, the Justin Herberts, the Keenan Allens, even Mike Williams at this point, Austin Eckler. Other than like the core guys that we all know and see tons of videos about, like who are some of the either new additions or drafts or whoever they are? Like who are some of the guys that have come in other than Zion who maybe are impressing more than folks thought that they were going to?
Yeah, okay. So I would say DeAndre Carter from a receiver perspective, like he was signed and it was like, okay, now the Chargers have their just bona fide, return man. He's going to return the punts. He's going to return the kicks. But what he's been able to do, he's been mainly working from the slot. What he's been able to do from the slot has been really impressive. He had 2 touchdowns during the red zone period yesterday. And really, it's like his short area quickness really stands out to me. And so like the bottom half of the Chargers receiver group with Josh Palmer, Guyton, and Carter, they all kind of do something different. And there's been a lot of talk about like who's going to be the wide receiver 3. I really don't think it exactly matters, because like Palmer is going to be like he could be like a possession guy, whereas Guyton's going to be the deep threat vertical guy. And then Carter, I think, is kind of somebody who can work, underneath across the middle. Like you just dump like a 2-yard pass to him and he can kind of put his foot in the ground and go the other way and zigzag his way through traffic for like a first down. Now, I think Palmer probably, leads the pack in terms of that pecking order. But what DeAndre Carter's been able to do, it's been really impressive, because I know he had like 4 touchdowns last season with Washington, and 3 of them came in the red zone. He's not the biggest guy, but he just finds ways to, make people miss. And he's really shown that. like I just saying, like it's his ability to just put his foot in the ground and zigzag the other way. It's his short area quickness has really been impressive.
Nick, let's go to one Nas Adderley for a second. Dan and I were talking about this on the show as far as how good he's looked just over the last week of practice. And when you and I were there on Saturday, when we had Coach Hill talking about the growth, the maturity, everything that he's kind of come into this year and learned, it seemed like the same comments that he was saying, or excuse me, the same comments that Coach Hill was saying echoed the exact same comments that Nas was saying when he was at the podium a couple days ago as well. And obviously he's had the 2 interceptions this week. And as Coach Hill had said, that he's really taken on that leadership role with Derwin James being out for the time being. But what is it about him that whether from what you've seen on the field or what you've heard from the rest of the coaches, as far as just what's this next step that he's taking and coming into this defensive position for him?
Yeah, the next step really, and like you had said, Ronaldo Hill spoke about it. Brandon Staley spoke about it. Nas even followed up. So like they're clearly all on the same page, and it just appears he's just out there playing free. Like maybe it just has to come down to everything isn't so like calculated, like not so like robotic, and he's just out there making plays. He spoke about when to turn on the gas and when to ease up and let plays develop in front of them before kind of striking, making a play on the ball. And the last 2 days he had a pick on Justin Herbert, and then yesterday he picked off Chase Daniel in the end zone. And so that's kind of been the downfall to him a bit, right? Is like he's around the ball, but he can't quite bring down the interceptions. So he looks to be turning a corner here, and without Derwin practicing as his contract stuff, still continues to unfold, Nas has been the guy on the back end, really just patrolling at every level, and he's really shining without Derwin back there. Which what's going to happen when Derwin is back on the field, and who knows?
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of see the secondary now with so much depth that I think was probably one of their Achilles heels in years past.
Yeah.
How do you see? There's been a lot of talk about Deane Leonard. We've heard Keeman Hall. We've heard Brandon Sebastian. We've seen all the JT Woods, Jazeer Taylor. There's a whole bunch of guys back there.
So many.
Like if there was one who like of the group who are kind of like deep in the roster that you would say like is Nick's lock, like this guy has to make this team. Like who would it be? Because I feel like everyone has a favorite that they keep talking about, depending on the day.
With like those guys that you've mentioned, between like the rookies that were drafted late and like Brendan Sebastian, he's had a handful of pass breakups. I think right now it's Deane Leonard. I think he has cemented himself. And again, like we're only a weekend, there's so much time. But if I had to pencil a guy in right now from what we've seen of 7 days, like he seems to be the guy. And he's mainly played on the outside, whereas like Jazeer Taylor has mainly worked from the inside. But Deane Leonard, I mean, he'll get right up in guys' grills. He's not afraid to get physical with them. And for a corner, taken late on day 3, he looks like he's a little better than that. Like usually those are like developmental type corners who maybe they're going to be a practice squad or like a guy just on special teams, where like he's probably, that's how he'll probably start out. But like what he has shown so far, he doesn't look like a corner that was taken in the 7th round.
We're talking to Nick Cothrell of Sports Illustrated. Nick, so looking forward, whole bunch of stuff coming up. What are some of like the unanswered questions that you have that you're going to be kind of focusing on as you get towards this next week of training camp?
Well, some of them are a little self-explanatory, right? Like right tackle. That's going to be something that's going to just continue to evolve. That'll probably be answered at the end of training camp. Right now, it just kind of it seems like they're set with a few exceptions, right? So you have right tackle. We've already spoken about the running backs. Cornerback seems to like in terms of their pecking order for like 3rd. Callahan seems head and shoulders above Michael Davis. So it'll be interesting if there's any shift to that later on. But right now, Callahan seems like the guy there in terms of the cornerback 3 spot. We already kind of spoke about the wide receiver 3. Palmer seems to have the edge over Guyton, but both of them are going to have kind of their own niche. I guess to really answer your question, like what's going to happen at fullback? And it's been kind of difficult to gauge that right now because fullbacks aren't getting a whole lot of run as it is, right? And so it's been difficult.
Everett's taking some snaps at fullback.
Yeah, it's like it's difficult to really judge like who's kind of, edging out one another in that battle. Like how is that going to continue to evolve? Because they're not exactly taking as many handoffs as like Isaiah Spiller out there, So that's going to be something that's going to be pretty interesting. But aside from that, it's like a lot of it is just depth questions, right? Like the Chargers did so much in the draft and free agency and via the trade market to really answer a lot of their starting spots. So right now, I guess really it's just right tackle, the second running back spot, and fullback.
Let's jump on the right tackle for just a minute here because we've been seeing Storm Norton and Trey Pipkins essentially every other day. The other guy essentially is rotating in and starting off with the ones, and that's how they have done their pattern. And that's why it still just seems up in the air right now. Yeah. When we finally gotten a chance to get pads on, it seems like so far from reports that they're just about even. But when we really heard Rashawn Slater echoing the work that Trey Pipkins has put in this offseason, we've seen the documented work that he's put in with him and Duke Manyweather.
Yeah.
Do you think that from what you've seen from him and the way that you hear his fellow offensive linemen talking about him, that he may have that much more of an advantage?
I don't know if it's fair to say he has an advantage right now, but I don't think like Slater's comments should go unnoticed because those are two the tackles are always working together, right? Like that's one position group, and when they're out there training, for a month out there in Texas together, they're spending every day together, they're eating together, they're hanging out when they're not working out, and he really was, like you had just mentioned, like the praises that he was giving Trey Pipkins and how he's coming along. I don't think that's nothing. I still think it's, like I said, just a wait and see for that spot. Even Brandon Staley, he had said like even Storm Norton looks better than how he looked last year, and he kind of spoke like I think it was like the first day of camp actually that both of them look noticeably different, like physically, and that they feel confident in either direction they go, but they do expect that position to be better than what it was last season. So I think Slater's comments are definitely worth reading into, but I don't know necessarily if that means that like Pipkins is kind of held to a higher regard than Norton just yet.
One question I had, and this is an interesting one. Chargers fans have kind of always been curious and been very intrigued by the kick returner position, and obviously got DeAndre Carter slotted on that. He's going to be there. But I read an article that you had sent out that had shown that Bryce Callahan was actually taking snaps at punt returner. Yeah. And noticeably, Jake and I were actually just talking about this on the last episode. Like one of the guys that was not doing that was Joe Reed, who a few years ago everyone thought was going to be that guy. Like, do you take anything from that? Like, why is Bryce Callahan back there, and why aren't some of those other guys there? Like, what's that returner depth looking like?
Yeah, and he's continued to do it to rotate in there as the deep man. In fact, he was doing it yesterday. It was Carter, Michael Bandy, and Callahan. I think it's more of an emergency type role. Like Ficken wants to be ready if a situation presents itself. But I also think like this is the time to experiment and see what you have. Like they were working on a bunch of special teams yesterday, and like I wrote in my observation piece yesterday the amount of different guys they were rotating in at gunner. It was like almost 10 different guys that they were putting in there, and I think it's like they want to see who looks better than who they, if there's someone that just evolves that they think can do a better job of a guy that just like, for example, like Jalen Guyton's been working at gunner. He's never done that in his career, but if he turns into a guy that all of a sudden becomes their best gunner and they just kind of stumble upon it, why not use him in that role? So I think that could kind of be what they're doing with Callahan, as well as just kind of protecting themselves in case you get into a pinch in a game. You need a guy that can go back there. But it at first, I was a little taken back just because of Callahan's injury history. Like, he hasn't played a full season in any of his last 2 years in Denver, and yet you're trying him out there as the deep man, a position that you're kind of vulnerable to getting banged up in. But it still seems like it's Carter's job.
Nick, I'm going to put you on the spot here for a second, and I was looking for it, and correct me if I'm wrong. Has your 53-man prediction piece come out yet? Have you done that yet, or are you still waiting to get closer to the regular season?
Yeah, I put out a piece on this the day before camp started. I put out a piece.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I apologize. I was looking for it. I couldn't find it. But my question to you is going to be, because obviously coming from the Rams, you've seen one of the best as it goes in regards to the interior defensive line position. And this is a conversation that Dan and I have had, for the last several weeks now. There is just a vicious amount of competition in the interior of this defensive line. SJD, Austin Johnson, Morgan Fox, Breiden Fehoko has had a great week of practice thus far. Is it? Give me your numbers, because again, I did not get a chance to read it, but I'd like to know, especially from where you wrote that article to where we stand today. Is it still symmetrical as far as who gets the roster spots and how many interior defensive linemen do the Chargers keep?
Yeah, it's going to be so tough. Like, that is just going to be an absolute dogfight. Like, there's no way around it. And I mean, that's what you want from that position group, especially, the issues they had in stopping the run last year. It's tough to say that anything has changed, but like you had mentioned, like, Breiden Fehoko has looked, really, really good. And in my initial projection, I didn't have him in there, not because I don't think he was capable, but they just have so many bodies in there, right? Like, so you have Sebastian Joseph Day and Austin Johnson as like the two starters. You drafted Tito. You brought in Morgan Fox. I had Jerry Tillery in there, and then am I missing somebody else?
You got Covington. You got Merrill. I mean, there's a whole bunch of guys.
And then I had Covington, right? So like, there's 6 right there, and then I had Fehoko as like the 7th guy, but I only had them keeping 6. So right now, I would probably stay put with what I put out with just the 6, but at the same time, like, Tillery's gonna have to prove himself, because really the way my read on it is they're going to take like the best 5, the best 6 guys in that spot, regardless if you're a 7th round pick, or a 1st round pick, or an undrafted signee. Like, they're going to go with the best guys. So that's going to be, the bottom of the pecking order for the inside interior spot is going to be quite interesting, because there's just so many different options. And
so right now, for that 6th spot, so right now is Tillery, if you were just isolating it to like this camp, is Tillery in or out?
Well, right now, I would say Fehoko has had a better camp. Now, at the same time, like, where there's been 2 days of pads, and it's so difficult to judge the trenches without the pads on. So like, you're kind of splitting hairs when you're talking about 2 days of work. So, but at the same time, like we've been talking about, like, Fehoko has looked really good. He's looked better than Tillery, but it's tough for me to like flip Tillery out and put him in over
just
2
small
days.
Sample size.
Yeah,
it's a small sample size.
Exactly. So,
all right, we are wrapping up with Nick Cothrell from Sports Illustrated. Jake, any burning questions? We've gone through all kinds of training camp battles, storylines, key performers. The one, actually, Jake, I'll let you think about it. The one guy we haven't really talked about much is Gerald Everett. Now, in years past, we've seen kind of the tight end group kind of shift from, Hunter Henry, then we had Jared Cook, and then, obviously Gates before that. But then you kind of go to this Gerald Everett now, who has seemingly more athleticism, more versatility than we've seen here in quite some time. Do you see the team actually utilizing him as much as, I know we had the press conference, he talks about like he feels confident, he wants to do it. Do you see the team actually utilizing him in all those different ways come regular season?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why not. And he kind of spoke a little bit about it yesterday of, about the different ways that he thinks he can be used and not just being like a one-dimensional type tight end. And really, why not? Like he definitely is way more athletic than Jared Cook. And I even think, when Gerald Everett was with the Rams and when he was with Seattle, like I don't think they've fully tapped into his ability and how athletic he truly is. Like, why can you not, squeeze a little more juice out of him? He's a guy that has continued. It seems like as each day of camp goes on, like during 11-on-11s, he's becoming more and more involved. And I mean, that just makes sense, right? The more reps that he's getting with Justin Herbert, the more chemistry and the cohesion they're kind of building. And, it's like that non-spoken relationship where you just know where the guy's going to be. I really think that he's going to provide, he's going to provide a little more than what the Chargers have gotten the last few seasons out of the tight end position.
Dan, by the way, I don't have any burning questions. Nick has been awesome in answering these questions. I was trying to go through it in my head. I'm like, is there anything that I missed? Is there any big storylines that we haven't talked about yet? And the answer is no. So Nick's been killer on this.
Well, Nick, so as we wrap up, so I guess like moving forward, all right, so we got Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Sunday. I think I heard they're going to be doing like an intra scrimmage against each other in the evening. Like, what are you looking for out of camp the next few days? Like, obviously you got some days left, but in the next kind of, let's call it 2 or 3 days of camp, what's kind of your focus?
I mean, every day is a different day at camp, right? Like you guys know, like yesterday, I want to continue to watch more of the work in the trenches between the offensive line and the defensive line. And specifically, like not even just the first team, like how does Jamari Salyer look? How is Will Clapp looking? Like, and we spoke to great length about the depth of the interior defensive line. Like how is that formulating? Yesterday, they were just in shells. They weren't in full pads. So they didn't do any like the one-on-ones, but that's going to be something that I'm going to continue to try and monitor closely as, we get closer to that scrimmage, and the scrimmage itself should be pretty telling and how guys are stacking up.
100%. Nick Cothrell from Sports Illustrated. All right, so for folks who are not familiar with your work, guys, go check out Nick's work on Sports Illustrated. Nick, where can folks find you on socials? What are you up to these next few days? What kind of articles are you going to be ringing out?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Nick Cothrell, and then all my work is done on ChargerReport.com, part of the Sports Illustrated media group. And really every day after practice, put out observations and notes from stuff that happened on the practice field, stuff that players or coaches said after practice, as well as just really any storylines that are evolving as camp unfolds. And like we were talking about, like the scrimmage should be pretty telling on where certain guys stack up and are they working with the first team or the second team, etc. So should be a good weekend.
Love it. Nick Cothrell, Jake Hefner, Dan Wolkenstein. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Nick, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you out there at camp on Saturday. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your afternoon, evening, and morning, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks for having me, guys.